and I am reading this book. I'm doing another chapter. So I am reading Daring to Hope, Finding God's Goodness in the Beautiful and the Broken by Katie Davis Bayers. And guess what? We are going on and we should be in chapter 11. Well, this book is moving right on along, right? Yes. So, chapter 11, Daring to Hope, Choosing to Believe. She reaches for my hand and smiles. I reach for hers and force myself to return her smile, force myself to look truly joyful. I want her to know joy here. I want her to know joy here. At 26 years old, Betty is the beautiful mother of a 3-year-old boy. He came to live with us a few months ago. One of the many people God brought to fill the gaping hole left after Catherine's death. She now weighs 69 pounds and battles AIDS, tuberculosis, and all the complications that come with the two. This is beginning to feel all too familiar. The hand she reaches the hand she reaches out reminds me so much of a hand I held so recently, of a woman I loved hard, of a friend who became a family member. As I look at Betty, I am afraid. Can we do this again? The question that I don't want to think reverberates in my head, and I try to push it back. What if you don't heal her, God? What if we get to know her, come to love her, and you take her too? I don't think I can do that again. I fight the tears and force a smile. After all, she might get better. She might live. And right now, I know she needs me to believe that she can live so that she can believe that she can. How do you keep believing that when the last time you were wrong? When the last time before that and the time before that you were wrong? I sat down on the side of my couch that is now her bed and asked about her family. Even as we talk, I feel my heart start to pull up a wall. How invested should I get? I got flesh questions. I know better than to let my doubt get the best of me like this. I should know better anyway. Haven't we repeatedly seen God's redemption in the hard? Intellectually, I know that my job is to believe in his goodness without wavering. His job is everything else. But my heart can be so slow to remember. This is the sin of the Israelites, of all humankind, really. This slowness to remember that all he has done as we stare intensely at what he hasn't done yet, what he might not do. His answer is steady and true. What if I don't, child? What if I don't kill her? What if my plan is different? Still, I am with you. Still, I am God. I study her face, this woman in her mid-20s just like me, a mother just like me. Life has dealt her a different hand, but her brown eyes are searching just like mine. Her smile is gentle, genuine. God brings to mind a favorite miracle. A large crowd followed and pressed around her, and a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, who touched my clothes? You see the people crowding around you, his disciples answered, and yet you ask, who touched me? But Jesus kept looking to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. I resonate deeply with this woman. I can see her pushing through the crowd, reaching out for Jesus' hem. I can feel the strain, that desperate reaching, longing to touch him, just even the very edge of his clothes, a longing for only him. I imagine her inner pleading after trying so long to be healed. Please, please. And I am like the woman with the issue of blood, except I am the woman with the issue of doubt. I am the woman with the issue of sin, with the issue of flesh, with the issue of forgetfulness. I am a woman who wants to snap my arms shut and fold my arms tight around my chest to guard my heart, which is still so raw and exposed. protected from being broken yet again. I want to gather my children to myself and shelter them from the ugly hurt of this world. My mind wanders too quickly from he can to I can't, and my focus turns to earthly struggles before it rests in my heavenly Father. Like the woman with an issue of blood, I am desperately in need of his touch. According to Mosaic law, this woman wasn't even allowed to be in the same room as Jesus, let alone touch him. Her disease made her unclean, prohibited from mingling with the general public. To be discovered would have meant possible punishment and certain humiliation. Despicable, dirty, disgusting. Toward this woman, Jesus turns. He sees her. I can imagine his tenderness as he turns toward her. I can imagine his voice dispelling all her trembling fear and assuring her that reaching for him was, in fact, the right and faithful thing to do. I imagine him gently locking eyes with hers, knowing her, loving her. I can imagine this because it is what he has done for me time and time again. I stretch out my shaky hand and he turns towards me. He sees me. He knows me. I know deep in my spirit that I want Jesus in the same way she did. But the truth is, I can't fold my arms to the hurt of this world and simultaneously reach out for my Savior. To reach him, I have no choice but to fling my arms wide open. I push aside the thought of hopelessness that would cloud my mind and seek his compassion for the woman in front of me now. This woman so like me. Give me your eyes for her, I pray. I reach for Betty's hand and I know, just like that bleeding woman, I must seek Jesus. If only I touch his cloak. Hope is the greatest expectancy of this woman that Jesus will help her. Hope is our greatest expectancy that we will know him in all of our circumstances, even in the seemingly hopeless ones. Hope is this mocked by the world, nonsensical reaching through the crowd just to touch him. To the cynical, it seems like a waste. Why reach in such a crowd? Everyone is touching him. You're wasting your time. What if nothing happens? We risk great embarrassment to hope in this way, don't we? But the reaching shows something about the woman's heart, something about my heart, a faith undeterred by the world of our circumstances, a faith that believes in what we cannot see. My expectancy grows my heart toward God, grows room in my heart for more of him, and allows me to see him wherever here is. Sure, daring to hope feels a little too much like playing with fire, especially when we have been burned before. To hope exposes me, just like the bleeding woman. It lays me bare and vulnerable because I can't fix this and I can't control the outcome. My hope puts me right up next to Jesus, torn, open, and defenseless, completely at his mercy, completely surrendered. Jesus turns toward the woman. Your faith has healed you, he says. Her faith had defied the crowd, her faith that ignored the potential humiliation of being caught touching the Son of God as an unclean woman, ignored the fact that Jesus was busy, actually on his way to heal someone of a much higher status, ignored the reports of the doctors who said healing was impossible for her. Jesus saw her faith and it stopped him. Toward this woman, Jesus turns. And the crowd is big and the cynics are many, but through it all, he knows and sees her. He knows and he sees me. He doesn't just notice her, he names her. Daughter, he says. He takes my face in his hands, and it is this same word that he speaks over me. Daughter. He calls me as his own. His gentle voice dispels my fear and assures me that my reaching for him is not in vain. Your reaching for him is not in vain. I stretch out my arms to him and realize that he is right here, just 2 steps in front of me, clearing the way. I push aside the what if that would tempt me to not reach for him. I know who I am and I know who he is, so I must touch him. The sweet phrases that from Isaiah flood my mind. The train of his robe filled the temple. The whole earth is full of his glory. I reach and I feel that his hem is plenty wide for me to grasp, enough for me and for you, and today and tomorrow, enough to fill and enough to spill over. Jesus turns. He looks into my eyes and sees me and my fear and my hesitation and my sin. Daughter, he calls me. Faith has healed you. Faith will heal you. He speaks life over all my brokenness and over all of Betty's and over all of yours. His message to us on the cross is the same as his message to the woman with the issue of blood as he stoops down to look into her eyes, to speak to her, to meet her need. You are worth it. And I want it to be my message to these hurting ones he brings to our homes. You are worth it. We are for you. He is for you. I want my life to be spent chasing after him, and I want my arms to be filled, not just reaching out, but for gathering in the hem of Jesus. I want my arms to be filled with gathering his grace, his love, his goodness, his glory. I want to follow him wherever he is going to be, so full of him that he overflows out of my arms, out of my very life. Even when it means reaching out my hand with a smile to a situation that might hurt, will hurt. He gave me the grace to hope before, so I am asking that he would give me more grace again, even if it is harder to grasp this time. Grace to feel joy, and grace to hope for life, and grace to fight hard because people are worth the fight. Grace to have arms so filled with him that they have to remain open and that he spills out. Again, I name this place, the Lord will provide. In a very poor and vulnerable in very poor and vulnerable communities, it is common for the suffering, disabled, and sick to be cast out and forgotten. In places where survival is day to day and people are struggling to muster up enough resources to feed themselves and their children, it is unusual to waste such precious resources on someone who seemingly will die soon anyway. This is how we found Betty, left alone in her home and essentially wasting away, no longer able to gather enough strength to walk out the door of her one room house. Her sister from northern Uganda had said goodbye and taken Betty's son to live with their extended family, expecting that she would not live much longer. A concerned neighbor led me to her house, wanting to help but finding herself unable to do much with her own limited income. Several hospital visits revealed that Betty might, in fact, recover if provided with the proper care and a nurturing environment. Truth be told, my heart was certainly not ready for another person of such great need to enter our lives. But I knew that the alternatives were few at best. Though it was not probable that God would heal her, it certainly wasn't impossible. And something had shifted inside of me as I processed my grief over Catherine. It wasn't a one-time lesson, and I would need constant reminding of it in the coming months. But God had been so near to us, even though he did not choose to heal her. This time, though, I hoped for healing just as much and certainly prayed for it. I also felt certain that God would bring about something beautiful, even if Betty died. Not only had I experienced a new intimacy with God while Catherine lived and died with us, I had watched my children blossom as we shared life with this hurting family. They were much less hesitant than I in welcoming Betty. They simply saw her, they saw her need, and they loved her. She never lived in the guest house out back, but simply moved into our home because she needed help walking more than a few yards. So many times I found a few of the girls curled up with her on the couch, reading, singing, or painting her fingernails as if she were a dear friend, which she soon became. Her personality was sweet and gentle, and she fit easily into our household, quietly observing as our noisy and sometimes chaotic life swirled around her. I chopped pounds of carrots for stew and taught my children how to read. My little ones lost teeth in library books and shoes. We made cupcakes and played hopscotch and studied world geography. And at night, I tucked them all into bed, said goodnight to Betty, who slept on our couch, hid myself away in the bathroom, and let my weariness crash over me. As much as I believe we were called to this life to open hospitality, deep in my spirit, I was tired. A few months after Betty moved in, Simon and his grandmother came to live with us as well. They needed a place to stay where they would have reliable access to medical care. 10-year-old Simon was a child sponsored by Amazima and my staff, and I noticed that Simon didn't seem to grow or gain any weight. After Simon had endured many different scans and hospital visits, a doctor was able to show us why. We gasped as we realized we were looking at a real, true miracle. A scan of his esophagus showed that it was almost completely closed, allowing little or no food to pass. In other words, he had lived with a nearly closed esophagus for his entire life. How does a child live for 10 years with minimal ability to swallow any nutrients? So Simon began a series of surgeries that would restore his esophagus and trachea back to normal working order. They arrived in the middle of the night, Simon working hard to breathe through his new tracheotomy tube and work from the anesthesia of his first surgery. His mother's eyes were fearful, and his grandmother looked downright bewildered. They needed a place with working electricity so they could use a blender to puree his food, a place with quick access to the hospital in case anything might block the trachea tube that was allowing him to breathe. Simon needed daily tracheotomy changes and had to be fed every 3 hours through his new feeding tube. Simon's mom decided to leave grandmother here as her caregiver while she went back to work. They stayed in our guest room instead of the guest house out back so that I could help with Simon's rigorous feeding schedule. His grandmother, who we will call Jaja, the traditional Luganda name for grandmother, already seemed tired and wondered if she was up for the long road to Simon's recovery that we had ahead of us. It quickly became apparent that she needed massive amounts of encouragement and reassurance that God was indeed in this with her and Simon, and I would not leave, and he would not leave. I told her that certainly God wouldn't have brought him this far unless he had an unbelievable plan for this little life. This was the one thing I wasn't sure I could muster to be the advocate of God's goodness to this woman 3 times my age, while I fought in my own heart for my own hope and also fought physically for the life of the woman now living in our family living room. I remembered how much God had used my answer to Mac's questions to strengthen my own faith and prayed that again this would be true. Just as he had so often provided what I needed without my really knowing or asking for it, God brought 2 excellent grief counselors into my life at the same time. Ironically, I initially befriended this couple in hopes that they could help a few of my girls, but they ended up being tremendous assets to me too, as I had lots more to process than I was initially ready to admit. One day I cried as I closed my eyes and told them of Catherine's death. I told them how I didn't know if Betty and Simon would live and how it was all just too much. Tell God how you feel, one whispered. You can tell him that you're scared. I opened my mouth to say, I'm scared, God, but the words they didn't come out. I thought to myself, no, that's not right. I am not scared. I do not feel alone, and I do not feel frightened. I searched my mind and heart to identify what I really was feeling. The words came out quietly. I am tired. And then louder and louder until I was sobbing repeatedly. I am tired. I am tired. I am tired. I stilled myself and waited for his answer. It came quickly, clearly. I am not, he answered. I know you are tired, child, but I am not. I do not grow tired. I will never become weary. Lean on me, for in your weakness I am strong. I clung to these words as I cared for them. Simon, Jaja, Betty, my own children. These words were my very breath of life. In the middle of the night, feedings, and in the countless changes and all the parenting in between, I spoke these words to him. I am tired, God, but you are not. You do not grow weary. It became my lifeline, this knowledge that he did not feel the exhaustion I did, that I could not fall on him and trust him to carry me. It became my lifeline, this knowledge that he did not feel the exhaustion I did, and that I could fall on him and trust him to carry me. Our house was full and our lives were full, and I fought weariness, but at the same time, I felt energized with great purpose to serve the people under my roof. Even in my weariness, Jesus felt nearer than he had ever before, and he confirmed to me that living and walking in hospitality, even when it was difficult, was his very best for me and for my family. Although I did not long for suffering or trial, I do long for the intimacy with Jesus that comes in difficult times. It is a strange paradox, but there is a great purpose in our struggle and pain. The woman with the issue of blood never would have reached for Jesus so desperately had she not been bleeding. Certainly, 12 years of sickness and being completely ostracized is not desirable, but to have Jesus himself look into her eyes, was it worth it? Though we would rather be delivered from our suffering and our trials or never encounter them at all, I had come to long for the tender care of Jesus that feels most tangible in places of pain and desperation. Really, we are all the woman with the issue of blood. We just have different issues. We grow weary, but he does not. He is the Lord who will provide, even when we are at the end of ourselves. When our energy is spent and our hope is on empty, when our children disobey or our families need more than we have to offer, or we feel like a terrible friend because we just cannot muster the courage, the encouragement that is needed, Jesus sees it and he is not tired. When we are jostled by the crowd of doubts and fears, we reach out to him. We reach out for his hem and he turns. He always turns, dear one. He looks into our eyes and says, "Take heart, I am with you. I am for you." His hem is wide, and whatever we are facing, he is enough. All we have to do is reach for him. And that is the end of chapter 11 in the book, Daring to Hope, Finding God's Goodness in the Beautiful and the Broken, by Katie Davis Majors. See you soon. Bye.